Hello, hello, dear everybody. This is another beautiful opportunity to present one of our amazing syndicate members. In this case, I'm here together with Brian Fey. He is, you could say, an expat in a sense. He used to live in the United States, and then in, I think, 2004, moved down to Michoacan, Mexico, to leave behind his previous life and start a new one in a project that he started, and it's called the Bosque Village, which is going to be linked down in the description somewhere. And I encourage everybody for you to check it out, because Brian has really done an incredible job. It's basically a one-man built village with amazing structures, with a regenerative forest, with a food forest inside, and it's really, really inspirational. When I first saw just a bit of what you've done, I was totally blown away, and super excited to reach out to you and to talk to you. And from there, we've been talking a little bit. I had the opportunity to talk with you beforehand a little bit. So now I'd really like you to have the syndicate as a platform for you to talk, share a little bit about what you've learned. Some of the experiences, and some of what we're going to talk about today is about how the importance of forests, because you're kind of a really good expert on that topic, in terms of the ecosystems, global ecosystems, and how we can achieve a positive impact having a forest. And then I think would also be super exciting to talk a bit about your off-grid experience. So welcome, Brian Fey.
Thanks, Dirk. Thanks for the opportunity. I guess the reason I'm interested in talking with you is because of your focus on having a positive impact in various parts of life. And I really like the idea of everybody where they're at, not necessarily in a forest, but where they're at, to inventory all the inputs and outputs that they have in their life, so that they can live in a more fulfilled way, but we can also make a positive future for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the cool thing is, we've talked about this before, is kind of like when you make the balance and then you get to net positive, because that's something that, honest to God, most of us right now are not. I mean, I think you are probably very close, or maybe even there already. Like if you look at all of what you've done, but very, very few people in the world have achieved net positive, or let alone like 100% positive, like whether everything that they do really is a positive impact. And I think that's a very exciting future to head towards, a future where every one of our interactions makes the world a better place, and we're after having a fulfilled life for how many every years we are allowed to be here. You can look back and say, my life was actually good for the planet. So yeah, I'm super excited.
It's a really difficult challenge, and I'm not one of these guys who's kind of like an echo asshole. You know, I'm not out there to judge other people. I know it's really hard if you live in the city. I know it's difficult to make changes, and it's easy to become despondent that it's impossible. But I think it really is just a matter of making a list of all the different ways you can have an impact, and then doing what you can do. So, for example, the easiest thing to affect is what you eat.
Yeah.
Right? So we can actually make a list. I have a spreadsheet of all the foods I eat, all the ingredients I use, and then I can figure out, like, where does that come from? Can I get it more locally? What is the type of labor that's used to produce that? What is the health impact on me and other people I share food with? Can I get it more locally? Can I grow it myself? You know, we don't have to be perfect about that, but we can.
Yeah, I think one thing that is really the difficult part right now is, like, our society as is currently is not set up to be a positive impact society. Right. It's just like the way that we produce, the way that we sell, the way that we buy, the way that we store, the way that we do all these things is not set up to have a positive impact, but it's actually all set up to have a negative one. So I think the biggest reason why it's so hard, what you're describing, is because you had to come up with an alternative for pretty much everything that was normal to a person in let's say in an urban environment somewhere in Europe or in America. So yeah, I'm super excited to hear a bit more of that, and then also about Bosque Village. So maybe walk us a bit through there. Like you came to Mexico, you found a piece of land, you decided you wanted to move off grid and regenerate the forest. So what was your experience, and also what do you think is the role that forests play in regenerating the earth and specifically having a positive impact?
Sure. I grew up with a lot of nature due to the influence of my dad. And so we spent a lot of time in the Olympic Mountains and a little bit in the Cascades up in Washington State in the United States. So I always had a very high level of connection with nature, almost, and I would avoid the word probably mostly, but almost to a spiritual level. And so coming down here, I had reasons to leave the United States, and I found this forest for sale. It's a recovering forest, meaning it was logged about, I'm not real sure on the history, but somewhere around 70 years ago, probably. And so at some point, this was mostly cows. And so it's a recovering forest where it was naturally repopulated with pine trees. And it's good it wasn't like a government planting program, which had all one species, but instead it just slowly grew in with a mix. And so that was very attractive to me. The first time I walked around this property, it just really felt magical to me. And I had to make a very hard decision because this was my dream in front of me, and it was pretty scary. You know, I didn't know anybody down here. I didn't speak Spanish. I had never lived off the grid like this. And so, you know, but I went ahead and said, you know, I got to do it. I'm a person who believes strongly that the planet is on the path to destruction, and that we need to evolve solutions. And whether or not I can make the magic solution or not, I don't think there is one, but I can be part of that process. And so for me, protecting this forest and learning how to live in it without destroying it has been a really interesting challenge. The first 2 years, I didn't have electricity. And so I didn't have solar panels yet. I didn't have internet, very isolated, and had a lot to learn. That learning process started in 2004. So I guess I'm at 16, going on 17 years now. And it's been some serious, strange adventures, some of which I won't share. But a lot I do want to share so that other people can speed up their own process in living in a very different way.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, I know many of us right now are thinking about a more natural lifestyle. We're thinking about going out there, and I know it's also not. And I mean, for one thing, that I know for you in 2004, without a lot of infrastructure, solar panels weren't really even readily available, I think, in Mexico back then. And all of that infrastructure was probably also very expensive. And the internet wasn't to the extent existent where we have millions and millions of YouTube videos that explain pretty much everything that you can do out there. And there's channels, and even something like the Syndicate wasn't around. So I can only imagine how difficult it must have been. But so I think there's obviously going to be two sides to the story. One which is saying, okay, this is hard, it can be hard, and then the other side, it could be maybe very easy to do it as well if we found the right way of doing it. You know, I mean, yeah. If you're like, I mean, you like, I see in your story, I see a super Herculean task done by one man. You know. Like, you came in there and you said, I'm just going to build a village by myself, and I'm going to be creating this entire thing and regenerating the forest and all that. And that's super amazing. And that itself is, to me, is a super hopeful story. But I mean, because I think if one person in 2004 could do it, and yes, it took him a while and all that. But then if we get together like 20, 30 people to a community, and we put some funds behind it and some technology and what we have access to right now, I think we should be able to do this in a lot less time. Yeah. And have an enjoyable experience around.
I think the technology is much cheaper now There are a lot more options than there used to be. Even something as simple as LED lights that use less energy, or better inverters for solar systems. And solar panel prices have just dropped amazingly if you look at the graphs on that. And so even though I very much still want to focus on conservation, the price, the difficulty of doing this has really improved. And also, I think that if we develop, and I think Paradise Syndicate can be part of this, is if we develop templates for how we interact with the natural world, depending on the climate, like what kind of buildings should we build in what kind of places? How can we interact with our local communities around us? That's extremely important, because a lot of these projects are done by outsiders. And if you don't have a good local reputation, you will fail. They'll make you fail,
Yes.
and, you know, at least around here. So you need to have a very good reputation. And that's true in other places as well, where if you're going to, especially if you're going to be making cultural alternatives, you want to make sure you're not violating local norms or laws.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of tricky stuff with that. But it is encouraging that there's more interest right now than I've ever seen. When I started this, it sounded crazier. And now, especially with the pandemic and the accessibility of internet in more remote areas, far more people are willing to do it. They're interested now. They want to learn. Whereas
I would say,
like,
I would say now it becomes, I think we're seeing a shift from, it used to be something crazy, right? Because everything was very natural in a sense. And at the same time you had your cozy home and all that. And now all the environment kind of breaks down, and we have less and less places which are really authentically natural. And at the same time, we have the more access, as you say, to remote areas. And so what I believe is going to happen within the next couple years, even more and more, and then really taking off, is I think people are going to realize more and more that the absolute luxury really is nature, right? The ultimate luxury in a sense is nature. And
yeah, I think it's a really important point, because a lot of people have asked me, well, how do you feel about giving up so much? And I have given up quite a bit, especially after so many years here. You know, I almost take the forest for granted now. And I forget until I go back to the city why I'm out here. But it's you know, a lot of things I've given up by living a lot simpler are things that really weren't serving me anyway. You know, I used to have a huge freezer in my basement that I just used to store curry and pasta sauce I made. And it was a total energy hog. I was wasting energy all over the place, and I still was doing better than most people. But it's really difficult if you're surrounded by a consumer culture to break away from that. Even in your own social group, you know, if they're flying somewhere and they're going to go on vacation here, or there's just so many things in the consumer lifestyle that it's hard to break away on your own when you're surrounded so deeply by it. So for me, it was really an extreme break, because, you know, just totally not having any power or connection for years was a way to kind of cut off the drug of cheap energy. And I do see it kind of as a drug. If you have it, you'll use it. And so even here, like a lot of people, if they're going to go off the grid, they have an entire house, half of it's full of solar panels, and they've got a huge battery bank. And you can't really say that ecologically they're doing any better. It's kind of fake green. In fact, photovoltaic energy is not particularly green.
Yes.
Conservation is, and I've only got 340 watts of panels, so I've got a tiny.
I think there's ways to do this. Like, have you seen the movie The Need to Grow? It's like a documentary that came out a couple of weeks ago or so. So it's a really interesting movie, and it's about a guy, I think his name is Michael, who invented what he calls the Green Powerhouse, and it's basically it works in any climate. It's like a greenhouse which produces blue-green algae, and then from what I gather how it works, the blue-green algae, they for one thing creates methane, and for the other thing probably gets processed into some type of burnable fuel, which they use to run a generator with. So basically the funny thing is the thing draws down CO2, turns it into fuel, electricity it turns it into fuel and fertilizer, and electricity is kind of like a byproduct that can power 100 houses. And it's a tiny setup. So it's actually, it's a powerhouse, a power plant that works with blue-green algae, draws down more CO2 than it needs to, like that it produces, and at the same time produces electricity and fertilizer. So it's pretty much a pretty good powerhouse. Then sadly, it caught a fire. You know what you thought? It caught a fire immediately after being really successful and raising a ton of awareness, and burned to the ground. Although there was nothing really burnable inside the place that burned down, you know. But anyway, so it's a very cool concept, I think, and it's something that we can work with to generate alternative energy sources, which are not just zero impact, but it's actually ideally even positive impact, right? And I mean, I agree on the solar panels. But kind of coming back a little bit to the story that, I mean, to your place. I mean, you just said you take the forest for granted, and I think anybody that would visit you right now would totally be like, "Wow, this is absolute paradise." I mean, yeah. I don't know. I'd love for people to see something of some footage and stuff from your place. I don't know whether there's any possibility we can share some. Maybe we'll put this onto this video.
Right. It's a little difficult to share that because I have very low bandwidth, and so I don't think I could play a video that was online, at least. The best thing people can do is to look up a video called "A Quick Tour of the Infrastructure of the Bosque Village." Yeah. And maybe we'll put a link down below.
Absolutely. We'll put a link down there, and maybe I'll even show some pictures, because I'll be editing this afterwards. Maybe I'll put some pictures on top of here so people get a little bit of a sense, because short from being there, it is really hard to experience all of these things just from our own little living room or work desk or wherever we are, right? So
a lot of the systems I have are actually pretty simple. Like the composting toilets I use don't use any water, and they're very simple to build, and they could be built with local materials. I'm really wary of most fancy solutions for ecological issues. So when you mentioned the blue-green algae thing, you know, I'm going to always look at that kind of thing with a very critical eye, because I constantly am seeing, you know, links to technologies that really don't pencil out very well. And they sound neat. And so for the most part, I want to reject almost all of technology to start with, and then slowly consider what existing proven technologies I am willing to have in my life, like a camera and like a laptop. And I do have photovoltaic, but very small. And then with anything really innovative, you have to be skeptical.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. That there's for sure a lot of greenwashing happening and all that. So, but I do also know we've been discussing about this topic between like the difference between positive impact and zero impact, and we both agree that we need to get to positive impact to repair the damage that's been done in the world. And I think it is definitely not something that you would find a lot, but I think especially. And then also, I mean, I know where you're coming from, right? You need to build all these things, and just to building a power plant, you're already using tons of energy and resources and bolts and nuts and all these things. Right. So that in itself is always going to have, in a way, a damaging impact, right? So, and the way that I look at this is I always look at it over lifetime. So I'm kind of like, might be that you have like kind of like a seed, right? You know, you might be having to water that seed for a while until it grows into a plant which then can live self-sufficiently, and so or even positive and be even off positive impact. So I kind of think we get an activation energy in, then if that is smaller than the energy that is being or the positive impact that is being generated over time, then I think we are fine, you know.
Or I think a good example of that would be with architecture. Where I think there's kind of two ways to go. You can build buildings of all natural materials, probably relatively small and simple. We use cob here, which is just a mud mixture, the same as adobe. And you can go with this building that can just rot. So its ecological footprint is very low. Or you could also build a building that perhaps has people living denser, as opposed to spreading out. So multi-story, doing rain capture, using no energy for heating or cooling. And so your cost over time is really low. And if you build that so it can last 600 years, if you design it correctly, then even if you're using concrete, which I like concrete roofs because I can put solar panels and hot water heaters and other things on top, even though you're using a high energy embodied material, over the lifespan, if you build it right, the ecological footprint is far less than a building that was built in a more normal way.
Absolutely. But then again, coming to your example, let's say we build a house out of adobe, okay? And let's say we built the frame structure out of wood. Mm-hmm. So if we go ahead and let's say we cut down 10 trees to build that house, and we built the house with adobe and wood, and then down the road we plant 20 trees for the 10 trees that we just cut down, we actually had a positive impact while building that house. Yeah. So with the CO2 that is stored in the wood and with the future CO2 that's going to get stored in the future trees, right? I mean, again, this is all simplifying it down to CO2, but the similar argument could be had for plastics that we build earthships with. Like we build plastic bricks, we store our plastic in plastic bottles and use them as bricks. Then it's also something that would at least make sure that this plastic is not out there in the throat or in the stomach of some animal, but it's stored away safely, right? Having said that, so I think that I think the shift that I find very exciting is that of saying, how could we design a house which is not just minimizing, but is maximizing, and it's maximizing the positive impact. So I think again, with that concept of concrete, I mean, there's concrete that there's concrete that actually takes up more CO2 in the lifetime than it does there's the Portland cement-based concrete, and then there's magnesium oxide-based cement, which actually over time gets harder and harder and harder and actually takes up more CO2 than otherwise. So I think we have solutions out there that are super encouraging. But coming back a little bit maybe to the concept of the forest, you mentioned something about also growing food inside your forest, right?
Sure. That's probably one of the more interesting things I'm doing here. And it's certainly not profitable when you compare it with fossil fueled agriculture or something, but I'm doing it the really slow way. So this was mostly pine forest. I also have madrone and oak here. And what I've done is I've cut down a lot of the pines because coniferous forests are the least biodiverse type of forest. And you could see that. There was no underbrush in lots of areas, and that's okay. The pines came in as kind of a pioneer species. So they're colonizing the area for the first wave. And then what I do is I very selectively cut those, and now you see more of the oaks taking over. And you're also getting lots of capulines, black cherry, which there was hardly any here before because there had been cows on the property, and the cows were eating all the baby capulines, the cherry trees. And so now I'm getting areas with this massive biodiversity. Wildlife is increasing, bird life is increasing. I'll get more fungal varieties, fungus, mushrooms. And so that's been really exciting to watch. I've never had that opportunity before. I consider this a great honor to be in this position to protect a forest like this. And then we're also putting fruit trees out there and nut trees. And we're doing that where it's mixed into little pockets, as opposed to just cutting the whole thing down and planting a really profitable crop and making some money. And that is what people do now. It's understandable. If you buy a piece of land, you want a return on your investment. And so you cut down the forest, you plant something that will give you money, and then within 5-8 years, you're making good money off it. But the problem is there's no biodiversity in that. The soil is largely dead. And so I'm competing with that right now. I'm living on the edge of deforestation, and people around here are selling their forests to monoculturists, and they're actually getting cut down.
Yeah, that's a super important point, and I think also a very scary prospect, right? It's something that's happening all over the world. The deforestation of rainforests, native forests, which is just done for financial gain. I think, again, the interesting question I'm asking myself is, would be a competing model, right? Which would allow for some cutting, because cutting down a tree is not a bad thing, right? I mean, cutting down, we agree on that.
Yep.
It's a question of whether you cut down the entire forest and destroy all the ecosystem thereby, or whether you go in selectively, kind of like you're explaining. So have you at all like looked into, like, what's your, have you looked into creating a model, or would you be open to that inside the syndicate to create a model of how we can create a financially prosperous forest business, right? Because that's something that is going to be very interesting to you and very interesting for people that want to preserve forests. So, I mean, have you ever heard about the Empress tree, for instance?
Sure. And I have a list of plants wanted, and I evaluate those. Again, I think that some of these green efforts get really off track. The Empress tree, I believe, is popular because it grows really fast, right? Mm. We should be very hesitant to go for the quick solutions. I'm planting nut trees. I'll probably be dead before those are producing very many nuts. And so we want to go for longer solutions in many cases. So again,
wouldn't there be a possibility of like combining them? What is your argument against?
It isn't one or the other. It's just that I think, especially, and this is one thing about getting older, is your perspective on time changes. And so I think something is happening pretty quick if it's happening in 5 or 10 years, you know, and that seems really good. I think there's this danger of, for example, going for the fastest growing tree, and it isn't bad to do that, but the attitude is suspect, I guess.
Okay, but I get you, right, and I think you definitely have to be always like very mindful with what we're doing. But it's like I've seen this is also I call this a bit ecofascism. Okay, it's at points. I've had this discussion, I think it was 10 years ago or something. I was first thinking about these concepts, and I was like super excited about bamboo and why don't we use more bamboo instead of cutting down trees and all that. And then there was like this girl, who was supposedly very, very into eco, and she was like, no, well, you cannot plant bamboo because don't you know what's going to happen to the local environment, and you're going to be destroying the entire habitat and all that. And I'm like, yes, but also no, you know, like, first of all, there is no, like, we are creating and engineering constantly the surrounding around us. I mean, it's not, there is like, even, and I would say you agree, right? If you would just leave your forest, like it's cut down 70 years ago, and then you would just leave it, do nothing to it, it would look different from what it looks like right now, correct?
Yeah.
Because you planted certain trees, and that's not a bad thing. I think, right, generally speaking, we could, the way that I'm imagining this is like you have an ecosystem, and the more diversity is in there, the more plants are in there that are providing food for animals that are creating habitat for something else, and all these things, the more biodiversity naturally comes. So I don't think growing any specific plant is a bad thing, unless they are like a parasite and kind of living off of everything else and then destroying the rest of the habitat.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful. Of course, a lot of people will bring up invasive species, and I am cautious with that. It is possible to bring in invasive species, but it's not nearly as dangerous as people think who aren't experienced with it. I would actually like to collect the most valuable trees from around the world and have them here. Even something like the tree that produces quinine to fight against malaria. That's a very valuable tree. Now, I haven't investigated that particular one to see if it would do well here or not, but that's an example, especially if we look at civilization having problems in the future, that's a very important medicinal tree.
So what's your main argument then against having fast growing trees? Well,
I'm not arguing against it. I'm saying
you're just cautious of it.
Often there's these quick and easy solutions that people get excited by, and my main focus is on very long-term things that are proven to work, and they might not be as exciting in the short term. So it's not at all that I'm against it, and I would have to investigate the Empress tree more. Other people are very excited by the Moringa tree. It would be nice to have
I
a
mean,
tree here that has enough tannins in it to tan rabbit hides if we're raising rabbits. And I still have
I mean,
experiments to do using the oaks for that.
I
So,
guess generally speaking, we don't want to like just argue about one single tree, right? I mean,
right.
we're not talking about you want diversity in your trees
Yeah.
as well, but like coming back to that argument of how can we create a profitable, positive impact tree business?
Mhm.
There's something that if we don't produce anything or anything like we're going to be producing in 40 years, that's not going to be very helpful today. Like if I can, like one thing is if I can go over to the farmer and say, sell me your piece of land and I'm not going to cut it down because I actually have a model which is just as profitable as turning it into some grazing land or whatever for cattle. Because what I do is I go in selectively and I cut down the trees that are like you say pioneers that really take up a lot of space and reduce diversity, and I plant something else selectively, kind of like, do you know the concept of syntropic agroforestry?
I've not heard the word centropic with that.
Oh, that's super exciting then for you. There's a dude called Ernst Götsch. I think he's Swiss originally, probably, and he went into the Brazilian rainforest, if I'm not mistaken, to develop a concept of how to grow plants and food as well in the food forest system, like usable plants, medicinal plants, food plants, and he calls it syntropic. And I'm by far not an expert on this topic. I have some friends inside the syndicate that hopefully I get Arturo to talk and share a little bit about this, and I'm going to link you two. But he basically found a system where he can maximize plant growth and earth growth. So it's kind of like he without using any chemical fertilizer for sure. I mean, it's all organic, and it's something he works with a lot of pruning. So he goes in and he prunes the plants at the right intervals and the right sections, and he knows where to plant what plant in order to enhance the growth rate of these. And it's basically a super exciting system to create food forests, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, that works in every climate. So not specific to tropical regions. But I'll shoot you the keywords, and you can
Sure.
investigate a little bit down the road. But
Right.
that might be cool.
For now, economically speaking, it's fairly difficult to compete with the industrial agricultural system. And just because that's fueled by fossil fuels, which have externalities that are not being counted. So as long as that's the case, the easiest money probably comes from the industrial world. So a lot of people involved with permaculture, for example, aren't making money off the permaculture they're doing. They're making it off books, workshops, training people.
True, yeah.
And that is a criticism of permaculture, but at the same time, it really isn't. It's just a situation we're in economically. And so for now, I'm just focusing on long-term investments. I do see it kind of like sculpting the forest. It's like the biggest art project I've ever been involved with, and it's alive. And so I'm literally now going in with one park, it's right over here, and we're topping off all the trees, the oak trees mainly that are coming in, and that'll increase lateral growth, and we're actually going to grow spaces for people to be in. So instead of having a bench that's going to rot, we have a living branch that is a bench.
How does that work? Like, I'm curious in how that would look like. So you're topping them off at what size, what height?
Well, I just bought and this is, again, a technology I've decided to go with because I think it pencils out. I bought a chainsaw on a long pole. So a person holding it can cut up about the 16-foot level. That would be very difficult to do if we were using ladders and climbing trees that aren't very big anyway. It would be kind of dangerous. And so this one tool will allow us to top off the trees, and that forces the growth to exist down closer to the ground. That also allows more root space for other things within it. Because oak trees also tend to drop a lot of leaves depending on, there's two types here. One type drops its leaves, one doesn't. But they tend to cover up baby undergrowth. So, so it's going to be a very dense mesh of branches. It would be great for kids, it's like a living jungle gym. And you'll have little alcoves. You can sit with somebody and have a private chat with them. Maybe there'll be a very small fire over here. And so this is a sculpting essentially of a building. A building. I mean, that I may actually put roofing in some spots, or there could be tree houses within it. You'll see this kind of thing very uncommonly. You'll see people sculpting, like there's a book called How to Grow a Chair. And that author has a newer book that I'd like to get. And he actually just bends quick growing trees into the shape of a chair. And then later you actually cut that and it becomes a fully fused bunch of branches that are a chair. There's also lots of artistic, kind of magical tree sculpting. So this idea is to take an entire area. This is like, I don't know, 4 or 5 acres, and do the whole thing, and have within that other types of plants and more habitat for birds and other animals.
Awesome.
So I've never heard of that idea being done before. I have heard of, I think it was somewhere in Southeast Asia, they were growing living bridges. And
yeah, I've seen I think something in Japan where they grow gardens in this way, or like sculpture gardens made out of trees, and some fantastic thing. The first, like, you'd never see this before, and then once you run across it, you're like, wow, that's possible. And they're like, yeah, as you say, they're forming the trees while they're growing and putting them together. It's pretty exciting. And
again, that's not a very short-term profitable thing. It's a very long-term art project that will take, 15 to 40 years. But the key is that all of it's living. So
yeah, but so how do you feel about cutting down trees for wood, for timber?
I'm fine with it. And when I first moved here, I had kind of a more idealistic view that I'll just let everything become old growth forest. I'll let it all just, without manipulation, become like some of the old growth forests I've seen in the Olympic Peninsula. But as you pointed out, a lot of productive forests in the world are actually heavily managed. The Amazon, we're finding out more and more, was more heavily managed before. The Yucatan Peninsula was. And so humans can have a positive impact. I don't feel bad when I cut down a pine tree, even if we're just going to make a beam out of that and build something. I don't hug it, although I have pictures of people hugging trees. I think it's cute. I don't ask its permission. I don't feel there's some kind of pseudo-spiritual thing I need to do with the tree. I just cut it down, and then other stuff grows. And I use wood to the highest benefit that I can, whether that's artistic. I mean, we've made a totem pole before, for example, not a traditional one. Kind of.
Do you have a sawmill down there in the village?
What's that?
You have a sawmill there, in a sense?
Yeah, we have a chainsaw sawmill.
Right on. Cool. So, in that sense, like, what is it like? Couldn't you, like, I mean, probably not a lot profit, but if you sell the tree, like, is that something that is I mean, I would imagine from the cost that wood costs around here, quality wood is pretty expensive.
Sure, and that's actually been a great income. The first thing that changed my attitude, my initial perspective, like, I'll just leave it all alone and it'll all be wonderful, was that we had a pine beetle plague, a little black beetle that goes under the bark. And it eats the, I think it's cambium layer or something, the layer that the food of the tree goes through, and it kills the tree, and then it moves on to the next one. These are all over North America. If you don't stop that pine needle infestation, it will kill your whole pine forest. Everybody around here knows this. So we keep our eyes out for signs of that. And when the first time I saw it, I didn't know anything about this. I actually had government engineers come out, tag every single tree I was allowed to cut, and then we cut tons of these trees because they were moving fast, and we stopped the pine beetle plague. And the government actually said I had to spray chemicals on the trees to kill them all. And I said, I don't want to do that. And so they said, well, then you have to burn them. And you don't have to burn the whole tree, but you have to, like, burn the outside of it. So for weeks we cut down trees, and it looked like a war zone. And this was the first time that we were just, murdering tons of trees. They were going to die anyway. If I hadn't done it, the whole forest would have died. So it ended up being a great area for gardening. It was my first mass gardening attempt. And now that area is all grown back over because it was kind of far from the house. So now it's all just oaks and mixed trees. Also, the black cherries came in, the madrones come in. Madroños are arbutus species. And so I was starting to learn about forestry and how I can have a positive impact. Now, that was years ago. That was like, I don't know, 12 years ago at least. My current problem is actually forest fire. I've let everything grow up so much that we have had 3 forest fires in the last 16 years. And the last one was really hard to fight. It took 3 days to fight it. So I'm actually increasing risk of forest fire by having a lot more undergrowth.
Mhm.
And that increases the likelihood it will actually kill the pine trees. So now I'm looking at, okay, what can I do? Well, I did have a bulldozer come in and dug some roads on contour. They're kind of like big swales. So actually I built roads, they're just dirt roads, where I didn't even need roads because I wanted to control water flow. So I'm sculpting the earth itself to make there be more water soaking into the soil.
Of course, keep it
Really
human.
important because the humans have stolen all the water out of the springs. And so places where water used to flow, now it doesn't.
Mm.
And that gives a whole other aspect of the project where we're interested in extreme water conservation. But let's keep going in the forest. So now I'm getting a forest that's more in danger of extreme forest fire. My response to that is probably going to be ruminants, animals that eat brush. Now, they could be goats, but I know that goats are a pain in the ass because I'm a goat. That's like my totem animal. And so I'm thinking maybe burros, donkeys, that might be useful. Also because they're actually becoming a little bit endangered because burros are being sold to China for the leather. And so there's even though donkeys are very traditional in Mexican society, the number of them is decreasing. So I could kind of do a burro rescue project.
Awesome.
An option. Horses, of course, are actually good replacement for cars. And people
are you all fenced in, or like could the donkeys like roam freely?
Well, unfortunately, I have to have more fencing because I have gardens that donkeys would eat. And
so you have to tie them down to a tree or something like that.
Right, or I'm working a couple things. The entire property, it's 83 acres, has just posts with barbed wire, which I need to improve because the posts are made of wood. And so what we've done is we've planted along their cedar trees, and the cedar trees grow up, and then you can put your barbed wire on that. Now you've got a living fence post. That's much better because it actually is, weeks of work to maintain, it's what, 2.5 kilometers or so, almost 3 kilometers of fence. That's a lot of fence.
Yeah.
And so
how does your solution look like exactly?
For the fencing or for the ruminant?
Yeah, for the fencing.
Well, you just grow the cedar right there, and then you hook the barbed wire right into it. Normally,
okay, you would be growing the barbed wire on the cedar. Okay.
Yeah, and eventually the cedar will encapsulate the barbed wire, and that's actually a problem because if you were ever to use a chainsaw on it, that's very dangerous. So normally I have a rule to never put wire or nails in trees. But I break that rule. All the rules I make up get broken. I mean, I have a rule against plastic that gets broken, but the idea is to go in the direction of what's better. So we're also looking at, and I do use bamboo, at growing bamboo kind of paddocks, bamboo fence.
What kind of bamboo are you growing?
I grow 2 kinds. Well, actually I have 3. I have a timber bamboo that grows very slow.
Is that Dendrocalamus?
It's a clumper, not a runner. What's that?
Dendrocalamus asper?
I don't know its species name, unfortunately.
Okay.
And a lot of people say, as soon as you say the word bamboo, they say, oh my God, it's invasive, don't do that. Those people need to go study before they open their mouth as much. There's 2 kinds of bamboo.
No, it's super exciting because I've been in Bali, right, and I've done this course on bamboo building. And on that course, they were talking that there's like, I don't remember, like 10,000 different types of bamboo. And of course, runners and clumpers. For those that don't know, clumpers don't run, as in runners become invasive and clumpers just stay together. But the interesting thing was it was only 7 or so, I think, they were using really. So it's kind of like the most likely scenario is if you have a big wide diameter, then it's probably either guadua, or it is, which is kind of like the Latin American version of Dendrocalamus asper. And then they have normally there's always two kinds super cool, because one is normally always then eventually turns out white and the other one stays black or dark. So you can actually play with that, like in your designs.
Well, my bamboo grows very slowly here. It's about this big in diameter, so it's not like that. It's dry here most of the year. So
I have some dender. I have about 1,000 seeds, I think, from dendrocalamus. If I next time I come to my family, if I have a chance to pick them up there, I'll bring you some.
Yeah, I'm very interested. Now those would do a lot better down at the lake bed. So that's really where they should be growing bamboo. It's interesting. David Farrelly, who's a guy who wrote a very famous book about bamboo, here right across the lake. He died recently, but he wrote one of the most famous books on bamboo. So we've had a few conversations about it.
Awesome.
So the point is that if I grow this clumping bamboo in an area, it eventually grows thick enough that it's a fence. And so I can have a green fence for the bird.
You can manage it actually, even like you can make it, since if you're going to harvest bamboo, which you're going to be harvesting like after, like if you grow it from a seed, roughly after 7 years, you start harvesting, you harvest like the grandmothers, right? You can actually make sure that the entire thing grows in a long wall, really, not just like an unmanaged clump, but literally you can totally design, like you can tell the bamboo in a way where you want him to plant to get the next sprouting going on. It's pretty exciting.
Seeing plants as a sculpting material, as a living construction material. What we did this year was very exciting. Well, in past years, we've done experiments with how to reproduce bamboo in the best way. So we cut pieces of it and stuck it in buckets, and we did this and that. And what we found is that just cutting poles and burying them about that deep in the exact right time of the year, at the beginning of the rainy season, then each node will put down roots and it will put up a new bamboo. So we automatically get a line of bamboo just with our method of reproduction.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it will take about 8 years before that bamboo would be big enough to act as a fence for a burrow.
And depending on that, kind of depends on what you're using, but what kind of species. But yeah, it's probably about 6 to 8 years or something, probably.
It totally depends on the climate. And like I say, down at the lake, it's very different. And so even as you talk about, sharing things among communities or sharing ideas between ecological projects, you come up with templates and then you adjust those for the space you're in.
Absolutely.
So I like that.
We need to, absolutely, we need to work on those concepts. So here's because we're already getting close to the 1 hour mark, and I could stay talking about the village and the forest for a long time, because it's something I personally care about a lot as well. But what is it that you would like, if you would now could reach out to some syndicate members and could say, okay, I'm Brian and I have this and this and this, and I'm looking for people that are interested in this and this, and I can offer this and that. What would that be? Good
question. I'm a very independent-minded person, and so I haven't partnered up with people very well in general in my life. And I think a lot of people who do these projects are really independent, but that doesn't work. We have to work together. And so I guess people can check out the stuff I publish, and they can, whether they disagree or agree, or whether a solution applies to them or not, they can borrow it. There's the usual like, upvote, share on social media. And I'm excited by the fact that our technology allows us to become a group consciousness. I mean, you can almost get, a very hippie-esque LSD notion of group consciousness coming through the internet. So far, it turns out we use it to tell each other we're dumb. But I'm hoping for more. So with these other efforts, I guess I would like them to publish what they do, and ideally for free, because a lot of people get proprietary with their knowledge, and maybe I should do that. Maybe I should publish a book and make some money off of.
So I would say there is and we've talked about this again also before. There's no shame in making money off of knowledge, but also because it costs you to get to that knowledge. It's kind of like if you're a doctor and you studied 10 years medicine for 10 years, then you're getting paid for that, or if you're a patent lawyer or whatever it is. So I don't think it's unfair to charge for knowledge that you have either gathered or created. But at the same time, I'm a proponent of making as much of that available in a free manner, like even if it's short clips, right? And there's a lot of systems like where you can go ahead, you can have a series on YouTube on growing a forest, and then you can still sell a premium course. Like one thing is like giving out nitpicks and like little tips and tricks here and there for people to get their questions answered. Another thing is if you're like you have a specific situation, you have your, let's say right now you have a community that lives somewhere in a wood forest, and they just moved in there. They really have no idea what they're doing, and then Brian Fay's forest management course, like an online course that explains, okay, you need to be taking care of this and this and that, and here's how you can do blah blah. That's something that would create value for people, and it's something that you could be producing and selling. It's actually also something that we are looking to provide inside the syndicate. So I've told you about the fundraising platform. The next one after that we want to build is a platform for precisely online courses and experiences, so that we can have people like you share their knowledge, because I think that's very important, and it creates income. Ideally for the syndicate members, and at the same time it spreads positive impact. And if we do it so that whenever we sell a course, a couple of trees get planted, then we're even having a positive impact with the business.
Sure. I guess for me personally, I don't want to do that. I want to provide my knowledge for free. I will figure out some other way to survive. Obviously, if it's live, if somebody is here and I'm talking to them, then yeah, they should pay for my time. I'm much more willing to do that. Also, I've had about 3,000 people come through, and if I'm hosting them and feeding them and they're living in buildings I built, then I'm willing to charge for that. I need to charge for that.
Absolutely.
But as far as knowledge goes, I hear what you're saying, and I don't think it's evil to charge for knowledge, but I feel like the survival of humanity is at stake. And I want to make sure that I have space in my life, that I have wealth coming from somewhere else, to be able to provide that for free in full. In my
very honorable, and I think also something which is super exciting. I mean, to get it's something that I would like. So the way that I'm thinking about doing this is kind of like we have these individual courses, right? We're going to be creating and we're going to be putting on that platform, and then in a similar sense to, let's say, Udemy or Mindvalley or something, maybe, or even Gaia and all these things, maybe you can subscribe for a very, very, very low fee, like $15 per month or something down the road, and you get access to all this knowledge, which is something like $15 per month is something that anybody can afford. It's not something that limits you. And maybe we can even say, okay, all of these and these and these courses are going to be completely for free for those people that want to do that. It's actually the capability of having free courses and paid courses is going to be part of that platform that we're going to put up. So
for me, I'm more interested in the crowdfunding aspect. I do have a Patreon account now, and I'm also forming a nonprofit in the United States so that people can donate and have it be tax deductible. I have a nonprofit here in Mexico, but I'm going to shut that down because nonprofits here work completely different, and it's been a big pain in the ass. So I would rather get tiny amounts of money, or large, from people all over the world who like what I'm doing, who see it as revolutionary, who see it as an alternative to the destruction of the planet, and then give my knowledge away. And so
I think we wanted to talk about, we can talk this maybe, and we could either do this as part of the conversation and extend it a little bit, because that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about next. So maybe we will make a break here, and I can decide later whether we're going to be releasing both of them or like in two parts or something. Because one of the things where we talked about your project and all that, and the other one which I wanted to dive in with you and take this opportunity is the concept of making sure that a village, or which is based on a forest as well, could be positive impact and producing value, producing income, right?
Economical sustainability is extremely important.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I did over this long period of time is actually run myself into absolute poverty, which has been helpful. It's very good.
People gets you creative. Gets you creative. So let's make a break here for now. We're going to continue this, but for just for the sake of having one video like on one topic. Brian, this was super enlightening, a beautiful talk with you, and we're I think people will be super excited to check out your project. And I can tell you from my side, I feel super connected to you, because I feel like you're for me, it feels like I'm talking to the forest itself. Like you're kind of like the human. If a forest ever had a human form, then it'd probably look like you.
What
So
a great compliment. Thank you.
And it's something that I feel encariñado, also kind of like yeah, anyways, connected to. So thank you for that, for your time, and all the syndicate members that feel that they would like to get to know you a bit better, or have some ideas or thoughts for you, please reach out to Brian. And yeah, until next time. So I'll stop the recording now. Bye-bye.
Right. Thanks so much, man.